Scattering the ashes of the deceased after their death is becoming more and more fashionable these days. Scattering means taking the ashes of the deceased to a beautiful place that the family remembers and pouring them out of an urn so that the wind can scatter them in all directions. The ashes of the famous ballerina Maria Plesitskaya, the science fiction writer Strugatsky, Edward Disney, the founder of the film studio of the same name, the film director Joseph Hitchcock, the writer Konstantin Simonov, and so on and so forth. General trends can be seen in famous people. People speak with words, but they also speak with actions, gestures and facial expressions. Dance is also conversation. In this sense, a great dancer who has asked to have their ashes scattered in their will, what are they saying to us? They are saying to their fans, I don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, I don't believe in God in general and in the possibility of communicating with Him, I don't believe in anything, I am leaving you and you are leaving me, goodbye. I would like to point out that Judaism and Islam unconditionally and severely reject even hints of the possibility of cremation and scattering of ashes. Only a watered-down Christianity, mutated into anti-Christianity, allows this phenomenon to exist. And not just to exist, but to develop, to make a profit, to win minds. They don't want to rot, people say. A man can live all his life in the interests of the flesh alone. Only the flesh and nothing but the flesh. But it is this very flesh that he shuns and is ashamed of when it loses its animating spirit. Tell him in his lifetime that the body must be subjected to the spirit, that the flesh must be ennobled by fasting and prayer. He will laugh in reply. But as soon as the body dies, he will turn up his nose and say, burn it. Here is a man who burns himself and scatters to the wind. He is disgusted and wicked. Both because he is proud. Bioburial is becoming increasingly popular in Europe. You can bury your ashes without an urn in specially designated areas. These areas are either simply sown with grass or planted with trees. The most you can do to mark the burial site is to place a small stone or plaque with the name on it. Instead of an urn, an egg-shaped biocapsule made of easily biodegradable material can be used. In this case, the person's ashes serve as fertilizer for the tree, symbolizing not the end but a new beginning. Or a set of pencils. The human body contains a lot of carbon, which can be converted into graphite and used to make simple pencils. One body can make 240 pencils. As a memento, they can be used to draw a portrait of a deceased or loved one. There are also adaptive techniques. You can use the ashes of a loved one to get a tattoo on your body. After cremation, the ashes are also added to the material to be printed with a 3D printer and used to make various sculptures. Fashion is fashion. So it is not surprising that many countries have been quick to embrace this innovation. China, for example, simply had to do it. Land in cemeteries is worth a lot of money, and burying the deceased in a coffin is forbidden by law. The West also supports dispersion. So they have designated a number of places where it is recommended to empty the urn containing the remains of the deceased. In a special flower garden in the backyard. Near the river, where the deceased often went fishing. In the park under a tree where they liked to spend time. Or in another place that was important to the deceased. An interesting fact, by the way. Every day, Disneyland employees sweep the ashes of the deceased from different parts of the park. What's even more interesting is that the remains are thrown into a common urn. And then they go to the landfill. So choosing a popular amusement park as your final resting place is clearly not a good idea. The remains of the deceased will not remain there for long. According to Orthodox Christian doctrine, all the dead will rise from their graves on the day of judgment, when their souls return to their earthly bodies. This is why the Church insists that the remains be returned to the earth. If the deceased was cremated, his or her ashes should also be placed in the grave. Scattering is unacceptable because it deprives a person of the possibility of salvation. Are there other ways of burying ashes? The Orthodox Church does not accept any ways other than burial in the ground. It is considered unacceptable to keep an urn at home. Exotic ways of disposing of human remains are also forbidden. For example, you cannot put human remains in biocapsules to grow trees. Although this method seems natural because it returns a person to his or her origins. But this is the position of Eastern religions such as Buddhism or Hinduism. Christians do not support the idea of reincarnation, believing that there is only one life, after which the soul goes to heaven or hell forever. Also, you cannot divide a person's ashes into parts and use the parts for something else. Modern designers offer many possibilities. For example, there are artists who paint pictures with ashes. They can also turn the remains into a diamond and a glass souvenir. But this is against our faith. It is forbidden to wear part of the remains inside rings or medallions. Even if the urn is buried in the ground, the body must remain intact after cremation. In some cases, however, the church has to make concessions. For example, members of the Orthodox community in Japan simply have no choice but to cremate and scatter the deceased, or place the remains in a high-tech crypt. Burial in the ground is prohibited by law in the country. The same ban is gradually being introduced in China. Here, multi-story cemeteries have sprung up, where people keep their urns in the ground. Supporters of cremation will tell you that there is not enough land to bury people in. They will say that cemeteries are growing, taking over cities and so on. And finally, I will tell you that these same fire worshippers do not have enough land. In 1997 they started a business of launching cremated ashes into orbit. Up to 50 urns are put into orbit each year for fabulous sums of money. One capsule of ashes, a NASA satellite, has already been scattered on the moon. To some, this sounds attractive and noble. But in reality, it is just a multiplication of the space debris that is increasingly flying around the Earth. Those who dare to stand out proudly always end up in the landfill. And finally, a virtuous person is compared in the scriptures to a tree that grows by streams. His leaf will not fall, and everything he does will be in time. See Psalm 1. And the wicked man is also likened to the dust that the wind blows away from the face of the earth. In the Bible, the ashes lifted up by the wind are instructive poetry. In life, it is the modern truth about a person who has completely lost his way. Amen.